close out Mental Health Awareness Month is specifically on suicide ideation, part 2 of our depression and suicide ideation series. And again, we're also closing out our anniversary, our first year anniversary. And again, I'd like to thank everyone that has supported and has come and listened to the videos and hopefully gained some knowledge so that we can stop the stigma. Okay, without further ado, we're going to move into our episode. First of all, suicide ideation is suicidal thoughts or suicide ideation, which refers to thinking about or planning suicide. Thoughts can range from creating a detailed plan to having a fleeting consideration. Last week we discussed depression, which can potentially lead into suicide ideation. And as we look at these beautiful faces on the screen again, Chelsea Chris, Naomi Judd, Robin Williams, Seven Bridges, 10 years old, 10-year-old Isabella Izzy Tishner, and high school freshman Nigel Shelby. Suicide is the 8th leading cause of death among children aged 5 to 11. And childhood suicide risks include mental health, prior suicidal behavior, trauma, peer pressure, school, and let's not forget the family-related problems. In this episode, we're specifically focusing on suicide ideation. In 2020, an estimated 12.2 million American adults seriously thought about suicide. 3.2 million planned a suicide attempt, and 1.2 million attempted suicide. Once again, this is something we need to get in front of. This is something that we need to take a whole lot more seriously in this country, in our communities, and definitely in our families, which is our foundation. Some of you may be asking, what causes suicide ideation? Suicide ideation can occur when a person feels that they are no longer able to cope with an overwhelming situation. This could stem from financial problems, the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, or a debilitating illness or health condition. Some other common situations or life events that might cause suicidal thoughts include grief, sexual abuse, financial problems, remorse, rejection, and unemployment. All of the people that we previously saw on the screen appear to not suffer from any of these causes that have been listed. But one of the things that we don't know, or we do know now, is that bullying was an issue for some. The thoughts that were in the minds of others, specifically, oh God, what's her name? Chelsea Chris, I'm sorry. Naomi Judd, just recently. And one of the things that I believe was said, that she was tired of dealing with her own thoughts. And so when it comes to suicide ideation, it's not a matter of something that's on the outside. It's a matter of something that's on the inside. And so in order to get to the root of the problem, a lot of it has to do with having a conversation and listening to the person. Not only listening to the person, but also not invalidating what it is that they may say. Here are some memes that I found to be quite compelling that were floating around on social media. The first one being that basically says what someone is going through, which is this big black circle. But what we see is this very tiny dot. You may not even be able to see it on your screen. The other one says, the worst part about being strong is nobody knows when you're hurting. Because being a strong person It's a matter of presenting this image or this front that you can handle anything that's thrown in your direction. And in a lot of cases, you can. But there are some things that stick on the inside. And those are the things that we grapple with. Those are the things that can keep us awake at night. Those are the things that trouble us, but we can't seem to get to a place where we can get rid of them. Yes, prayer is an answer for those who are believers. Yes, faith is an answer for those who are believers. However, if we're dealing with an illness and you're dealing with a situation where nobody has someone to talk to or a trusted person to talk to, you just internalize all of this. The next meme says, refuse to inherit dysfunction. Learn new ways of living instead of repeating what you've lived through. This is one of the hardest ones because a lot of us have grown up in dysfunctional environments. And our environments from a child dictate what we deal with and how we deal with things as adults. And so if you grew up in a dysfunctional environment, one being that you were told children are to be seen and not heard, basically what that does is that causes you to shut down, that causes you to feel like nobody wants to listen to what you say, that causes you to go into a shell and become this person totally reliant on yourself. Well, that contradicts us when we say it takes a village. Because if it takes a village, why is it I can't speak my mind? Why is it I can't go to someone about something that has troubled me? Oh, yes, we've got some issues within our community that we need to change. The third one says, the people who are always trying to be there for others generally know how it feels to have nothing and no one. Trust and believe. Those persons who are the most helpful, the most kind, those are the persons we really do need to keep an eye on. Because in a lot of cases, either they don't want anybody to help them, or they've just come to the conclusion that there's nobody around that they can trust. And in being that way and feeling that way, you end up having all of this baggage that you carry around in your mind. And in carrying all of this in your mind, it eventually can affect your physical health. So I thought that these were very appropriate because I'm sure that there are many of you, especially within the Black community, that carry a whole lot of burdens from years past that we need to get rid of. We need to process. We need to change our behaviors. But most importantly, we need to change our thinking about ourselves. Suicide ideation, let's talk. Once again, I'll be bringing back my two guests to tackle these last 5 questions, whom I am so proud of for their bravery to be able to talk about their particular experiences. And the 5 questions that are left are, did your depression lead to suicide ideation? Do you mind sharing how often you had those thoughts? Are you a person of faith, specifically a believer in Jesus Christ? Did your faith help? Did you discuss your issues with your leader or someone within your congregation? Leader meaning the leader in the congregation. If not, why not? If so, did they help or did they make it more challenging? What would you recommend for anyone that's struggling with the feelings of depression, grief, or suicide ideation? I specifically asked these questions because in the Black community, the Black church is a focal point and a foundation of our living. And in doing so, exactly how is the church helping? How is the leadership helping the congregation as it relates to our mental health? Because we cannot successfully have a healthy spiritual life until we have a healthy mental life. And so the next speaking voices you will hear will be those of my guest. Oopsie, I forgot I had bonus questions, which are: how can others help? Name something that's harming and annoying when others talk about mental health. What would you want the church to know, and how can they help?
Did my depression lead to suicide ideation? Ideations, yes. More so, more so after finding out the clinical diagnosis, like when it was confirmed, and the moment I started like really trying to think about how I got to these spaces, that's it. That's when I will say it seemed, that's when it picked up heavy. Like it picked up really heavy. And in those moments where I was really trying to cipher through my thoughts, um, not really learn, because I wasn't in therapy yet, so not even learning how to cope with my thoughts or what to do, right? No skills behind what to do if my brain is racing, what to do. Like I was not prepared for it, and so I'm thinking, hey, I can walk myself through some of this stuff, and some of those holes got really really dark. Like it seemed like I went down a rabbit hole because I was really trying to figure myself out. And so the suicide ideations were happening really frequently, like once a week, and I'm just like, no, you can beat this, you can beat this, you can beat this. And the more that I tried to like not seem like I was really in that space, I was really heavy in that spacing. There was ever only one real attempt, like the ideations where they were heavy thought processes. I definitely fulfilled the thought processes, meaning that they were thought all the way through, right from slicing wrists to taking a bunch of meds, and just right not having to deal not having to deal with trying to call somebody to stop me because I wasn't in a place of wanting to be stopped, right? I just wanted everything to kind of just end, right? Not even thinking about who it would affect. It was just, those were the thought processes. And that the one what I actually acted on wasn't even something that I had thought out. It was in the moment. I was like, this is a great time right now to go ahead and do it. And I was taken back at the thought process, but I was like, it's either now or never. You got your daughter with you, so you don't have to worry about who's gonna take care of her, right? I didn't, because I know I didn't have a plan, right? I didn't have a plan for that, so why not take her with me, right? No one has to plan it. Nobody has to figure it out. That was my way of like trying to hope that my family, right, or my friends wouldn't take it as hard. That was me saying to myself, like, nah, you don't want nobody to have to deal with it. And then every time they look at your daughter, they're going to see you, right? So if I just take both of us, no one has to think or process all of that. They don't have to deal with a continual hurt. These are things I told myself that made it more, right? I made that suicide attempt all about me and not about anybody else.
Did your depression lead to suicide ideation? And do you mind sharing how often you had those thoughts? I have had thoughts of suicide before. I don't know if I'll say that my depression had me in that deep of a place to where I was seriously contemplating it and seriously kind of wanting to take my life. But there are dark moments of depression that does happen. I think for me, I've had thoughts of suicide, and not so much that again that I want to take my own life, but it was more that I just didn't want to deal with like the everyday things that kind of went along with being alive. I didn't want to feel things. I didn't want to interact with people. I just didn't kind of really have the energy to exist, and so my suicide ideation was more of a if I don't wake up tomorrow, that's totally fine, and not so much that I want to take my own life. I don't remember having them a whole lot. I know that they would kind of come and go over time. I think the highest that those suicide thoughts were for me was kind of in elementary school, grammar school, around 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. That's what I kind of felt the most, I'll say, uncool, unworthy, and just kind of like unsure of myself. But since then, I don't think that it's been often at all. I think that it was just kind of like that like short time in my life that things were just unclear, and I felt like it would just be a little bit easier if I didn't exist.
Am I a believer in faith? Yes. I specifically in Jesus Christ. Yes, I am a believer. Have always been a believer. Gone to church my entire life. So yes, that is part of my foundation.
Are you a person of faith? Yes, I am a very, very, very faithful person. I grew up in the church. I grew up a Christian, going to the church that my grandparents grew up in, as well as my parents. So there was a lot of family, a lot of, home values that were kind of instilled in me early.
Did my faith help? Yes, eventually. Yes. In the dark places? No. Upon therapy and coping? Yes. Did I discuss this with, did I discuss any of my issues with the leader or the organization? No.
Did your faith help you? Did you discuss your issues with your leader or someone within the congregation? For me, no. For me, I don't think that I don't think that my faith at the time was something that I was able to lean on. I think as I got older, and my faith and my religion became a little bit more personal to me, and I was able to kind of develop my relationship with God on my own. I think that's when I was able to kind of lean more on my faith, when I was having those depressed moments to kind of pull me out. But growing up, faith was just kind of something that I was told to do, So I did not lean on that a lot in those early stages of depression as a kid and as a teenager, because I didn't know how. I didn't feel comfortable kind of talking to the older people at church. I didn't always feel welcome. And I remember there were some times where like just kind of like the talk of suicide would randomly come up amongst adults. And just the thought about it and hearing how they responded to it was something that I didn't really feel comfortable talking about. Didn't really feel that it would be well received, no matter how authentic and sincere it was. It just wasn't something that I felt comfortable doing. So I didn't talk to any leadership in church. I did not lean on my faith a lot as a child and as a teenager growing up when I was suffering depression. But since I've been older, as an adult, I think that's my only option right now. I think that's been the biggest help as far as overcoming some of those low moments, and that's just kind of leaning on how strong my faith is, knowing who my God is, knowing what my purpose is, and knowing what He has laid out for me. And so that kind of gives me some relief, and knowing that, hey, I might not always feel my best. I might not always know what I'm doing. But I'm faithful, and I believe that that it's going to be the best for me, and that my leader, which is my God, He's going to make sure that I don't fail, and He's going to be with me every step of the way. So that gives me the relief and the discipline and the strength to kind of overcome a lot of those low moments that I have now as an adult.
Why I did not discuss it with my leader or the organization. I had a couple of past church hurt situations that I don't even know if they knew that I was hurt by these things. So that kind of pushed me away from wanting to share with anyone. So I didn't share, more so because what you think to be or should be confidentiality, right, was a part of the hurt for me of confidentiality. And I've been a person of, you don't get to smack me twice. And that's just where I was with that. And I didn't want to feel it's a difference of like, you're helping me or you're being nosy. And I kind of still live in that space. I'm still very protective of myself and who I share and how I share. I share as I see fit, or as the Lord, gives to me or speaks to me to share. Then I will share according to that. But I still am very protective of my space when it comes to my personal issues. Yeah, I'm still very protective of that. What would I recommend for anyone that's struggling with the feelings of depression, grief, or suicide ideation? Well, I would share that it is okay to go and talk to someone about it. I think that's the biggest hump to get over. Because again, we live in our headspaces, and they've made therapy such a taboo, right? That it seems like, well, I can't tell people my business, right? All of that just comes from your past. But everybody needs an outlet. And so I look at therapy as not just therapy, it's an outlet for me to have someone who doesn't know me, right? And they talk about the non-biased ear, having someone who doesn't know me to just listen. The bulk of where I am and what I deal with or what I've dealt with, it was more so of me wanting someone to hear me out. Had nothing to do with, or has nothing to do with, you're trying to solve it for me, fix it for me. That is a part of the misconception, is that we believe if we share, people are going to either look at us, through a different lens of, something's wrong with you. And some people do that just because they don't understand it, or telling people your business. You can still have boundaries, right, around that. But it's more so having an ear, right, for someone to hear all of the things that you kind of take on a daily basis, which can be a lot for the mind to process. And so you just need an ear. You need someone to hear you out. And so that is my recommendation, right? If you do nothing else, have someone that you can talk to. And I say a professional because, again, for the ones that don't know how to deal with the things that might unfold in the conversation, you need a professional, right? It's nice to have a close friend that you can share with, but that's good. They have an ear, but I also needed an ear of a professional who knew how to walk me through coping strategies, or walk me through, how to really process these things. So that's my biggest recommendation, is that just having an outlet. Everybody needs an outlet that is not a close relative or friend, because it starts to bite into emotional aspects, and you don't necessarily need an emotional person when you're already emotional. You need someone with a sound mind, who can help you clearly process your thoughts, because these thoughts are just very heavy emotional spaces, and so you don't need two emotional people working through an emotional space. You need someone that has some stability to help you process those emotions and not kind of be with you in the emotions, right? So yeah, that is my recommendation. Go talk to somebody. It's so helpful because, again, you might not solve it, but you can have a release, right? You don't have to carry all of this in your brain by yourself. So yes, that is a recommendation, or that's what I recommend for someone who's been there. Please don't sit with these thoughts. Get some help. That's what the professionals are for.
What would you recommend for anyone that's struggling with the feelings of depression, grief, or suicide ideation? I would say don't be afraid to talk about it. There are people out there that love you. There are people out there that want nothing more than to see you smile and to see you happy. And they can't help you do that if you don't talk to them and if you don't trust them with your feelings. So I would definitely say get some help. You know, talk to people that you trust. Talk to your family. Seek out professional help. And utilize your circle. I think that the only way that we can help each other is that if these conversations become more regular, if people are more honest about what they deal with alone and not trying to make it seem like everybody's perfect, and that they never have anything wrong with them, I think that that's first and foremost for the world. But again, I think for you, you know, if you're struggling, if you're having thoughts of suicide, seek help. You know, there are people out there that are that can help you and that want to help you. You just have to be brave enough to ask.
How can others help? Truly be a listening ear, meaning that it is okay to say, if you are not in a mental space to listen to the person that wants to vent, but use your words and say that, and then also allot the time, because majority of the time when we're venting, we can go for a while, and so I say, like, be honest. The other person who wants to listen and wants to help has to also be open to having that space, because a conversation can go from 30 minutes to 2 hours sometime. And so if you can't allot that time, then don't invest in the person. There's nothing more hurtful than you saying, hey, let's talk about it, and then you're not engaged. You're on your phone, or you got to take a phone call. And phone calls are different than, hey, you got to step out, but like the whole time I'm talking, right, you're on your phone playing games. To some, that can seem like you're not in tune. It just depends on the situation. Some people have to be on the phones to listen. You know, I understand having to occupy, a certain part of your mental to be present. But there has to be some type of look up engagement of the conversation so that we feel like we can trust you with us. That's one thing. Another thing can be the questions that you're asking, or how you're asking the questions. I think sometimes when people hear about diagnoses of, depression, anxiety, suicide, they stray away from it, or they don't want to have the conversation. No, ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Like, hey, if someone said they mentioned they're having suicidal thoughts, like, how far have you thought that out? Like, it's okay to ask those questions because you want to know where they really are with it and what type of help they might actually need. So don't be afraid to ask some of those questions, because you feel like you'll push them over the edge. If you ask these questions, more than likely they've already had these thought processes and are already in those headspaces. You just kind of want to get in front of it. The asking, if you're okay, and not just that, are you really okay? How are you really doing? And you can kind of gauge on tone and body language to see, what they kind of are. That just also means that the people who are trying to help and assist also have to be in tune with what's not being said, per se. Name some things that's harming or annoying when others talk about mental health. Go pray. God got you. The worst thing. Especially if the person that you're talking to is either already has a foundation with Christ or has any type of religious affiliation, or the opposite of those who've never really, been exposed or have been hurt by the church. We ain't really trying to hear that. I'm not trying to be funny, but in your dark moments, scriptures don't cross your mind. They just don't. We're busy trying to get out of the dark hole. Once I get out of the dark hole and you want to talk about God and how he helped heal and brought you to a better space, we can talk about it. In the dark holes is not a time that we want to talk about it. We just don't want to hear it. What would you want the church to know? That there are more people struggling than they would possibly think. Just because they show up to church and praise God does not mean that they don't suffer silently. I am she. How can they help? Definitely by having more programs or events based around mental health, and not so much of the religious aspect, because that is a component, but a real conversation about mental health and where it stands and how you can be helpful before you start to push in the religious aspect and what the scripture says. That's pretty much the gist of that. Being open, most importantly, open to something new.
How can others help? I think for me, and my growth with suicide and depression and mental health, I think one thing I look for from my friends is just kind of like that open space, and not always advice. Just wanting them to be able to create a space for me to feel safe enough to talk to them when I am feeling low. Wanting people to believe me when I say I'm not okay today, and not think that it's just about attention. So I would say I think others, believe people when they say that they're not okay. Listen to them when they say that they're not okay and they need a friend, show more love, be kinder. I think those are the first way that I think that we all can help. But I think on a grand scale, we need to, again, have more discussions around mental health, because I think it's more common than we allow ourselves to believe. I think that we need to have more resources dedicated to mental health, not just in our neighborhoods, but also in our schools and in our hospitals. I think that getting the necessary help for some people is a little too far out of reach, and we need to make those resources a little more accessible. Name something that's harming or annoying when others talk about mental health. I think for me the biggest thing is just how it's not an everybody thing, how it's something that's kind of like isolated, and that everybody doesn't deal with mental health issues on some level. I like to say that I think that we're all on the spectrum on some verge, on some way, shape, or form. And I think that the only way that we can heal from these things and that we can kind of be okay as people is that, again, that we have more conversations about it. So I think the thing that's really harming the mental health conversation and harming people is people acting like it's not an everybody thing, that it's a you thing and that you're crazy. Because again, I think everybody struggles with mental health at some point in their life, and we just need to be more vocal about those struggles. What would you like the church to know, and how can they help? I would say that I think the church should know that while God and faith is the end all be all, there are some people who haven't gotten to that point in their faith to be able to lean on that. I think that we sometimes do people disservices when we downplay what they're dealing with and tell them to just pray and tell them to talk to God. While I think that that is the ultimate solution, while I think that God is the answer to all things and that He is the healer of everything, I think that there are some people that haven't gotten to that point in their faith, and you telling somebody that's really struggling with themselves, really struggling with their lack of feeling worthy, telling them to pray about it or that things are going to get better. I don't think in the moment that's helpful. While I feel that your intentions are, I think that we need to do more to support people that are struggling in those things, to provide more of a space to where they could feel comfortable talking about those things and get the help that they need, so that we're not continuing to produce this cycle, but that we are really again helping our people and getting them the support that they need to overcome some of these low moments. Because depression, again, is an ugly beast. And it's claimed some of the most powerful lives. So I think that we need to just be more honest and more open about the conversation that we're having, and do more to support the people that are struggling.
Suicide ideation risk factors. A family history of violence or suicide, child abuse, neglect, or trauma. A history of mental illness issues or mental health issues. A feeling of hopelessness, seclusion, or loneliness. Knowing, identifying, or being associated with someone who has completed suicide. Engaging in reckless or impulsive behavior. Identifying as LGBTQAI+ with no family or home support. Not being able to access care for mental health issues. A loss of work, friends, finances, or a loved one. Having a physical illness or health condition. Possessing a gun or other lethal methods. Not seeking help due to fear of stigma. Stress due to discrimination, racism, colorism, and prejudice. Historical trauma, such as the destruction of communities and cultures. Having attempted suicide before. Experiencing bullying or trauma. Exposure to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide. Exposure to suicidal behaviors in others. Experiencing legal problems, debt. Being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Suicide ideation related conditions. Depression. Some personality traits such as aggression. Conditions that affect relationships. Traumatic brain injury. Conditions that involve chronic pain. Alcohol or drug dependence. Borderline personality disorder. PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Understand that suicide ideation is a symptom of an underlying problem. Medications and talking therapy, such as cognitive behavior therapy or counseling, could often help. But it's the symptom which is a sign of the existence of something. Here are some things that may help. Having access to health care, including help for substance use disorders, access to overall support for health and well-being, family and community links, skills for solving problems and dealing with disputes, beliefs and discourage suicide and encourage self-preservation, a sense of self-esteem and purpose in life, talking to family, friends, or a support worker about their feelings, asking a loved one to meet their health provider and possibly attend sessions with them, avoiding or limiting the use of alcohol and recreational drugs, staying connected with others as much as possible, getting regular exercise, and this is a big one, eating a balanced diet, sleeping for at least 7 to 8 hours a day. That's a huge one. Not keeping guns, knives, or particularly harmful substances within easy reach. Seeking things that provide pleasure, such as music or time spent outdoors. Seeking and adhering to treatment. Following a doctor's recommendations about prescription drug use and monitoring for adverse effects. And here are some possible preventive measures. If you know someone at immediate risk of self-harm, suicide, or hurting another person, ask the tough questions. Are you considering suicide? Listen to the person without judgment. Call 911 or the local emergency number or text TALK to 741-741. Again, that's 741-741. for one to communicate with a trained crisis counselor. Stay with the person until professional help arrives. Try to remove any weapons, medications, or other potential harmful objects. This message is strictly to the church and its leadership. And once being a person considered church leadership, it terribly saddens me that we as the body of Christ is so unaware, unwilling, and unable to help those that struggle with mental illness. Now, let me make myself very clear. I am not suggesting that the church proper actually attempts to diagnose or fix what could be potentially going on with a person. I am suggesting that we become better educated and knowledgeable surrounding the issues concerning mental illness, specifically depression, which is one of the leading causes of suicide ideation that can be brought on by financial issues, grief, trauma, and family dynamics. I am therefore boldly saying, get to know those that labor among you. Pay attention to their consistent behaviors. Ask the right questions and stop using the Bible, faith, and God as the ultimate end-all to end-alls before properly using the natural gift of logic. The Bible emphatically speaks of first natural, then spiritual in 1 Corinthians 15:45 through 47. Even Jesus himself used natural things to heal. Remember the blind man? Jesus used dirt. Furthermore, stop being so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. Do some in-depth study, at least word study. Many of you speak on Jesus being the Logos, trying to sound all deep and spiritual. But do you know the entire meaning of the word from the Greek? Well, let me share it with you. The word logos not only means word, but it also means reasoning, idea. So in using the word, it is imperative that we incorporate logic, which is a part of reasoning, which is rooted in the Greek word logos. In other words, thought out with precision and removed from emotion. Whereas in our churches today, we operate more from an emotional standpoint than with precise cognitive deductive reasoning, as if Jesus is a David Blaine or Harry Houdini. We've got to stop the madness because it is and has caused much harm to those that sit in the pews. So please, ma'am, sir, preacher, prophet, potentate, study to show yourself approved. For you will be held accountable and judged more harshly. Oh, that's James 3:1. Keeping in mind that we are to teach foundational things, which in some cases may even start with reading and comprehension. Stop assuming that everyone in your congregation is learned, because if they can't comprehend Dick and Jane, they sure won't grasp the concept of faith is the substance. In listening to these young people that have spent a considerable amount of time in church talk about their suicidal thoughts and the idea that it's okay if I'm no longer here broke my heart. There should be someone in your congregation that is equipped to at least be that trusted person. Ephesians 4:12 through 16. Let me say that again. That trusted person, that trusted listening ear, with the emphasis, of course, on trusted. There should be someone within your congregation that has at least some basic knowledge concerning mental health resources. There should be someone in your congregation that is loving, kind, and observant enough to see the signs and symptoms of someone going down a path of hopelessness. Most of the time, especially within the Black community in church, it's the hopelessness part that weighs most heavy. From addiction to grief to unemployment, someone should be able to step in and check on those who are struggling instead of always pulling out the extra virgin olive oil on the same person every week. I've got to keep it real. It's one thing for the congregation to be all hands on deck for a grand old homegoing service, but there is a team of people that continuously check in on the loved ones, or there should be a team of people that continuously checks on the loved ones that are left behind. Concerning unemployment, the Bible speaks of taking care of other believers. 1 Thessalonians 5 and 14, Romans 12 and 13. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Is there a team of people or some type of fund to help those that are on the verge of losing their home or potentially being homeless? Yes, we're quick to bring some fried chicken, but slow to bring a life-giving, logical word, employment references, or some dollars when people are facing financial problems. So I'm calling out the church leadership to do a whole lot better and actually follow the principles as thus saith God's word. Finally, let me show you what happens when these things are not practiced. Sound doctrine makes for healthy mental and spiritual people. Misinterpretation of scripture makes for confused and anxious people. False doctrine causes mentally and spiritually ill people. In the words of Angie Spivey, concerning the last two, it shouldn't be in the church. And lastly, people of color and all those whose lives have been marginalized by those in power experience life differently from those whose lives have not been devalued. They experience overt racism and bigotry far too often, which leads to mental health burden that is deeper than what others may face. Racism is a mental health issue because racism and colorism causes trauma. And trauma paints a different line or a direct line to mental illnesses which need to be taken seriously. Colorism, you ask, what is it? Prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. Now that's a shame. Past trauma is prominently mentioned as the reason that people experience serious mental health conditions today. But obvious forms of racism and bigotry are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to racial trauma. Every day, people of color experience far more subtle traumas. For generations, the elephant in the room has been colorism. Another one of those things we've been sweeping under the rug for generations. How do we expect people to be healed when we're still hating on our own in the same manner as the others? It simply boils down to the color of our skin. It has nothing to do with intelligence, kindness, giving, or our character. To this very day, there are still those among us demonstrating prejudiced behaviors based on the color that we're in. Now, how do you think that makes us feel? Although rates of depression are lower among blacks and Hispanics than whites, depression in blacks and Hispanics is likely to be more disabling and persistent. That's because those of us with darker complexions are getting hit from the inside and out. And some of those other subtle traumas, people who avoid them and their neighborhoods out of ignorance and fear. Banks and credit companies who won't lend them money or do so only at higher interest rates. Mass incarceration of their peers. School curricula that ignore or minimize their contributions to their shared history. Oh, and there's more. Even on the job. How about that? Oh, yes, this is an issue that we need to take care of. This concludes our episode of Depression and Suicide Ideation. But most importantly, let's stop the stigma. Let's get educated, address the elephant in the room, and stop sweeping stuff under the rug. If you find yourself in a mental health crisis, please do not hesitate to dial the number on the screen, which is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, available 24 hours a day at 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. This has been Mental Health Monday. Sometimes. See you soon.